August 6, 1503. A dinner party. That's all it was supposed to be. Cesare and his father, Pope Alexander VI, 72 years old, still the most powerful man in Christendom, dining with Cardinal Adriano Castellisi at his villa outside Rome. A summer evening. What? Food. The ordinary rhythm of the papal court's social calendar. Both of them fell ill the next morning. The same symptoms. The same timing. The same progression. Fever first, then vomiting, then the particular darkness that descends when the body has decided it is losing a fight it cannot win. The rumor started immediately. Because in Rome in 1503, nobody believed in coincidences. Everybody believed in poison. The city had watched the Borgias poison their way through 2 papacies worth of enemies, and now the city watched 2 Borgias fall ill at the same dinner and drew the obvious conclusion. Someone had poisoned the poisoners. Someone had put cantarella, the white powder that dissolved in wine that worked on a schedule, that left symptoms indistinguishable from fever, into the wrong glass. Maybe it was meant for the cardinal. Maybe the cardinal was meant to be the only one who drank from the poison bottle. Maybe the servants mixed up the carafes. Maybe it was just malaria. August in Rome killed people every year. The fever that swept through the city that summer was genuine, documented, and indiscriminate. We will never know. What we know is this: 12 days after that dinner, Pope Alexander VI was dead. And Cesare Borgia, who had been lowered into a barrel of ice water by his doctors in a desperate attempt to break his fever, who had survived the shock so severe that his skin peeled from his body, Cesare was alive. But the man who had been the foundation of everything he had built was gone. And the world was about to remind him of something Machiavelli had been trying to warn him about for years. That fortuna, luck, fate, the force that lifts men to the peak and drops them without warning, does not negotiate. It does not give notice. It arrives at dinner parties. Everything Cesare Borgia built depended on one thing. Not his intelligence. Not his army. Not his administrative genius. His father being alive. When that changed on August 18, 1503, everything changed with it, and what happened next is the most extraordinary collapse of the Renaissance. Subscribe, like the video, and let's watch it fall. While Cesare fought for his life inside the Castel Sant'Angelo, the Vatican was dissolving. Not slowly. Not with dignity. In real time, with all the restraint of a city that had been held in check by 2 of the most feared people in Italy and had just been informed that one of them was dying. The servants started first. They took the clothes, then the furniture, then anything that wasn't nailed down and some things that were. When Michelato Carella, Cesare's personal executioner, the man with the violin string, burst into the papal apartments with armed men and forced a cardinal at dagger point to open the treasury, he was not the first thief in the building that night. He was simply the most organized. He took 400,000 ducats. Gold, silver, jewels, plate. He left the second treasury untouched because he didn't know it existed. 400,000 ducats was still, by any measure, a staggering sum, more than the Pope's entire annual income. He sent it to Cesare, who was lying in his bed burning with fever, giving orders through messengers because his body had temporarily stopped cooperating with his plans. On August 15, 3 days before Alexander died, the doctors made their decision. They filled a large wooden barrel with ice water. They lowered Cesare into it. The shock was so extreme that his skin peeled from his body. He went into delirium. The doctors watched him and probably expected him to die. He didn't. On August 18, his father did. Cesare heard it from his bed. He did not attend the funeral. He was not physically capable of standing upright. He lay in his room in the Castel Sant'Angelo and understood, with the particular clarity that fever sometimes produces, that the world he had built had just lost its cornerstone. I had thought of everything that could happen when my father died, he told Machiavelli 3 months later, according to Machiavelli's own account. Everything except that I myself would also be dying at the same moment. Pope Alexander VI's body laid in state in St. Peter's Basilica. Nobody kept vigil beside it. This is not a metaphor. It is a documented historical fact, recorded by multiple contemporaries with varying degrees of satisfaction and horror. The man who had held the papacy for 11 years, who had crowned kings and excommunicated enemies and bent the diplomatic landscape of Europe to serve his children's ambitions. His body laid alone in the basilica while the people who were supposed to honor it made their private calculations about what came next. The next morning, the attendants who came to carry him to his burial discovered that the Vatican guards had tried to steal the gold candlesticks from around the bier. There was a scuffle. The body was transported to its temporary burial with all the ceremony of moving furniture. Outside Rome, the state that Cesare had spent 5 years building began to react. The Romagna held, for now. Cesare's administration had been genuinely good and the population had no particular desire to return to the previous arrangements. But the smaller lords who had been waiting, watching, calculating, Guidobaldo da Montefeltro and Urbino, the families in Pesaro and Camerino, understood that the papal umbrella that had given Cesare's conquest their legal cover was gone. They started moving back toward their old cities. Cesare, still in the Castel Sant'Angelo, sent messages. "Hold. Wait. I am coming." He was not coming yet. His body would not allow it. And while he waited, the conclave that would determine everything about his future was beginning. The September 1503 conclave was the most important vote in Cesare's life. He understood this. Despite the fever, despite the physical state his body was in, despite everything, he understood this with absolute clarity. He needed a friendly pope. Not just a neutral pope. A friendly one. Someone who would honor the titles and territories and appointments that Alexander VI had granted him. Someone who would continue to provide the legal and political cover that the Romagna required. Someone who would not be his enemy. His first candidate was the Cardinal of Rouen, a French ally. The French had enough votes for him. Cesare worked the conclave from his sickbed, his messengers going in and out of the Sistine Chapel with the precision of a military operation. The Cardinal of Rouen didn't get the votes. Instead, unexpectedly, in a conclave that moved faster than anyone anticipated, Francesco Todeschini Piccolomini was elected. He took the name Pius III. He was elderly, genuinely pious, and not hostile to Cesare. He reconfirmed Cesare as Gonfalonier of the Church. He promised continuity. 26 days later, Pius III was dead. 26 days. Cesare had managed to hold his state together for the duration of one pope's entire pontificate. Now he needed another conclave. Now he needed another miracle. And the man standing at the entrance to the Sistine Chapel for the second conclave in 2 months was the one person in the world that Cesare had most reason to fear. Giuliano della Rovere. Giuliano della Rovere had been the Borgia family's most dedicated enemy for a decade. He had fled Rome when Alexander VI was elected because he believed, correctly, that the new pope intended to have him killed. He had spent years in France cultivating Louis XII, supporting every diplomatic move that would weaken Borgia power, waiting with the patience of a man who understood that the papacy was a long game. Now he stood at the entrance to the conclave with enough votes to win. Cesare had approximately 3 options. He could oppose della Rovere's election, but he didn't have the votes to block it, and a failed opposition would make him della Rovere's enemy without the leverage to do anything about it. He could be neutral, but neutrality in a 2-candidate conclave is functionally support for whoever wins. Or he could support della Rovere. He could trade his votes, and the votes of the Spanish cardinals who were allied with him, for promises, for guarantees, for a written commitment that the new pope would honor everything Alexander VI had granted. Della Rovere needed those Spanish votes. He said yes. He made the promises. He signed the agreements. He looked Cesare in the eye and swore on everything that is holy in the Roman Catholic Church. Cesare gave him the votes. Giuliano della Rovere was elected Pope Julius II on October 31, 1503. He began dishonoring the promises immediately. Machiavelli, who watched this happen from Florence, later wrote about it in The Prince with the particular restraint of a man trying to be accurate about something that made him angry. Cesare, he wrote, had made a good calculation about every possible pope except one. And the one he miscalculated was the one who got elected. He told me himself, Machiavelli wrote, that he had thought about what would happen when his father died, and had found a remedy for everything, except that he had never thought that when his father died, he himself would also be dying. But Machiavelli added something that Cesare did not say, his own private conclusion, the one that would eventually find its way into the prince's most devastating chapter. A man of real virtù, Machiavelli wrote, should never place himself in a position where he must trust the goodwill of another. Cesare had done exactly that. He had trusted Giuliano della Rovere. And now everything was falling apart in a way that no amount of military genius or political calculation could reverse, because the problem wasn't an enemy he could outmaneuver. The problem was a pope he had helped elect. Julius II moved against Cesare with the methodical patience of a man who had been waiting 10 years for this moment and intended to enjoy it properly. He stripped him of his titles. He demanded the surrender of the Romagna fortresses. He used the full weight of the papacy, the same institution that had built Cesare's state, to dismantle it piece by piece. Cesare was arrested in Naples in the spring of 1504. The charges were vague, they didn't need to be specific. The point was custody, not conviction. The Romagna began to fall. Not all at once. The population had genuinely valued his governance, and the transition was neither immediate nor clean. But it fell. The cities that had been united under his administration returned to the fragmented, violent disorder that had preceded him. Guidobaldo da Montefeltro returned to Urbino. The Orsini returned to their castles. The Malatesta returned to Rimini. The state was gone. Cesare was transferred from Naples to Spain in September 1504 on the orders of Ferdinand of Aragon. His captor having decided that a man of this particular capability was safer in a Spanish castle than in an Italian one. He was taken to the castle of La Mota in Medina del Campo. He was 30 years old. He had been the Duke of Valentinois, the Duke of Romagna, the Captain General of the Papal armies, the master of Central Italy, the man who had made Machiavelli reconsider political philosophy. He had employed Leonardo da Vinci. He had built a functioning state from nothing in 3 years. Now he was a prisoner in a Spanish castle. And the most extraordinary thing about what happened next is not that he stayed there. It's that he didn't.